remembers this year's London.
It was one of the topics which came under scrutiny. The 10-ton giant is airborne.
It was front-page news
from the scene of Britain's worst train disaster. Had she fallen, she was expected to be able to fly 8 years ago when he was a soldier in Germany. He met Priscilla Golding. As the body passed by crash near New Orleans.
We are all part of history. Wherever we are and whatever we're doing, world events shape our memories. And for most of the 20th century, those events were filmed and explained by Pathé. Pathé News captured history in motion, creating a living chronicle of a turbulent century. 1941 ended with the United States fully committed to the Allied cause. Pearl Harbor had stunned the nation, and her resources were put at the service of the war effort. The first American troops to land in Europe arrived in Northern Ireland. A turning point in the war had been reached. The Allies now needed a military breakthrough to turn the tide of war their way. In North Africa, Rommel made significant progress. He had turned back an Allied advance made at the expense of the Italians. The Allies were surrounded in Tobruk, and across the continent, the Afrika Korps were at the gates of Cairo. After months of hard fighting, Rommel's advance was stopped. At El Alamein, the Afrika Korps were halted in their tracks. Montgomery took over command of the 8th Army and, with fresh troops and equipment, regained the initiative. It was a significant victory, prompting Churchill to make one of his most famous speeches.
Ah, this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
In Asia, Japan made steady progress. Malaya, Singapore, and the Solomon Islands fell. Burma was under pressure. The Americans put their considerable navy into action against the Japanese. The Battle of the Coral Sea made full use of naval air power, and the Japanese met defeat at the world's biggest naval engagement so far, the Battle of Midway, giving Allied morale another boost. By December, the British were starting to push the Japanese back in Burma. In Europe, Hitler's troops fought the vicious Battle of Stalingrad, urban warfare at its most horrific. The Eastern Front was draining men and equipment for little gain. The RAF started its policy of saturation bombing to weaken the morale of the German nation, and many heroic figures emerged. By 1941, the Germans had formulated their plans to rid Europe of its 11 million Jews. The final solution was worked out by Reinhard Heydrich and his colleagues. By June, it was estimated that 1 million Jews had been killed. Orders to clear the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw claimed 50,000 more lives.
Planes. We must have more planes. The cry that was heard above the din of battle in Norway, France, Crete, and Britain comes now from Malaya. Early in December, just prior to the first Japanese raid, a consignment of Beaufort aircraft arrived at Singapore, fresh from Commonwealth factories, and so soon to go into action. North of Singapore, in the Malay Peninsula, Australian troops helped to make every inch of the way to the fortress island a death trap for the yellow plague infecting the Strait settlement. In a jungle waterway, a gunboat on the lookout for Japs. Patrols like this may suddenly come across hundreds of them scurrying about the undergrowth and scaling trees like so many monkeys. Mind you, a digger is no amateur at climbing trees, especially when it's a coconut palm. They likes that, the old coconut milk. It makes you drink. Malayan kiddies get a lot of fun watching some Aussies cooling off. Maybe he doesn't know it, but is his face red? Entrance to Palm Court is only possible if you own a membership badge. Nice work if you can get it. Good fun while it lasts, but what they enjoy, the Japs destroy. First pictures of Singapore's taste of aerial war reveal the damage done to Raffles Square in the heart of the island shopping center. Department stores, shops, and business houses. The same old story, with street clocks registering the early morning hour when death and destruction came at the hands of Hitler's yellow brothers. manager of this jewelry store seems to remember reading how the London branch swept up its windows and carried on. Beach Road Police Station becomes a busy place as Japanese nationals are rounded up for internment. British and Malay police collect them for transportation to secret camps. Since that first treacherous blow, the island has rapidly accommodated itself to a virtual state of siege. This part of the empire calls out for strong and immediate action. The Prime Minister's oration in the Senate chamber has been acclaimed in both countries as an historic masterpiece.
The fact that my American forebears have for so many generations played their part in the life of the United States, and that here I am, an Englishman, welcomed in your midst, makes this experience one of the most moving and thrilling in my life, which is already long and has not been entirely uneventful. I wish indeed that my mother, whose memory I cherish across the veil of years, could have been here to see. By the way, I cannot help reflecting that if my father had been American and my mother British, instead of the other way around, I might have got here on my own. I am so glad to be able to place before you, members of the Senate and of the House of Representatives, at this moment, when you are entering the war, the proof that with proper weapons and proper organization, we are able to beat the life out of the savage Nazi. Lastly, if you will forgive me for saying it, to me the best tidings of all, the United States, united as never before, has drawn the sword for freedom and cast away the scabbard.
During her conversion into a troop transport, fire breaks out in the 83,000-ton liner Normandy, recently renamed Lafayette. Investigators established, apparently beyond all doubt, that the sparks which started the fire came from an acetylene blow lamp, which was being used close to bales of inflammable material. Orders had been given to move the bales, but they were shifted only 2 or 3 feet. Although all suggestions of sabotage have been officially discounted, the whole business sounds mighty strange. Thousands of workers had to flee for their lives as flames roared through the one-time French luxury liner. The dockside at New York Harbor is cleared as firemen and operators from all over Manhattan fight the stubborn blaze that rages for 4 hours. Ambulance men are kept busy as the many casualties are brought away from the fire-swept ship. While the fire is confined to the 3 top decks, a new danger presents itself. The closing of the fireproof doors has prevented the escape of hundreds of tons of water poured into her by the fire hoses. Gradually, the ship becomes top-heavy, and she takes on a dangerous list. This was ultimately responsible for her capsizing. Early in the morning, she toppled over and lay in the soft mud in the docks. Not sabotage? I wonder. To the troops who have had some in the Western Desert, the converted River Nile boat, Arabia, is a dream ship come true. Nobby and Ginger, or so we'll call them, have just got 7 days' leave in Cairo. They've heard a lot about this houseboat, so they come aboard to sample its pleasures. The leave ship was the original idea of 2 officers who, realizing the need of a home from home, set the scheme going and even installed a sergeant as receptionist. Blimey, this is paradise after the sweat and blood and fears of the desert. and a waiter to bring tea while a fellow sits back in an easy chair. Nobby and Ginger are feeling like a couple of millionaires. All home comforts, well, nearly all, at a cost well within their means. The rest of the day is given over to anything they feel like doing. In a cabin deluxe, Nobby and Ginger spent the night. Next day, an early morning cup of tea helps to bring them back to earth. Breakfast, following a nice hot bath, and those desert meals of sand and bully seem like an ugly dream. With 6 whole days ahead of them, Nobby and Ginger decide to do the sights of Cairo. 2 light-hearted soldiers wondering where to visit first. Nobby, being a bit of a camera fiend, has an eye for the picturesque. So Ginger keeps a sharp lookout for a little souvenir which, more likely than not, was made in Birmingham. Walking through the Mouski, the oldest bazaar quarter in Cairo, is a grand adventure. Now for a ride round the pyramids on a couple of cruiser model camels. One side, please. Here we go. To round the day off, dancing on board Arabia. This is invitation day, when girls in the women's services come along to the houseboat for a tea dance. Music on the Nile, the soft lapping of water against the boat, and... oh, pardon us, but I think these two want to be left alone. Early one morning in May, a powerful 4-engine Soviet bomber came in to land at a northern aerodrome. Few people knew of its arrival. Out of it stepped the Soviet People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs, Monsieur Molotov, clad in heavy fur-lined flying kit. He had just flown from Russia, and close secrecy surrounded his arrival. Nearby, a guard of honor presented arms in salute to the important diplomat. It was the start of what was to prove an epoch-making visit. The crew of the aircraft, which included a famous Soviet airman, was soon at home with their comrades in the RAF. At the local station, a special train was waiting to bring Monsieur Molotov to London. As it drew out, he and the high officials who traveled with him settled down to an English breakfast and to enjoy the scenery. Monsieur Molotov's presence here was one of the best-kept secrets of the war. At a station outside London, Mr. Eden was there to welcome his Russian collaborator, and with Monsieur Maisky, who had joined the train earlier, left to confer with Mr. Churchill. Number 10 Downing Street. Long before the story was to be made public, these pictures were taken to present the historic events leading to the great Anglo-Soviet treaty. The conclusion of a 20-year treaty of alliance with full partnership in war and peace.
We shall work together for victory over our common enemy.
That victory is brought nearer by this wise and far-seeing instrument of mutual assistance. At the Foreign Office, the Grand Alliance was entered into as signatures were appended to the document by the representatives of the high contracting parties. Full understanding was also reached with regard to the creating this year of a second front in Europe. Once again, the great plane set forth, this time carrying Monsieur Molotov to the United States, whose willing participation in the Great Alliance completed the invincible trilogy of nations. The new treaty has had an electrifying effect all over the world. It is the power switch that will set in motion the machinery to grind the last vestige of tyranny out of Europe. Looky, looky, looky. Here comes the Director of Economy, Chief of Defense, Prime Minister of Prussia, Air Minister, and Hitler's #1 man, Field Marshal Goering. The Nazi thin man has come to see his Luftwaffe pilots in Italy. And as his wife has sent all his medals to the cleaners, old Skin and Bone has a look round to see what he can pick up cheap. And now, standing on a soapbox filled with reinforced concrete, the Reich Marshal speaks to a lot of Nazis picking the bones out of Italy after a spell on the African front. With the grace of a baby hippopotamus, the Field Marshal moves to an anti-aircraft gun site, hoping to heaven it's working properly. Well, so long, Tiny, we'll be round your way again soon. General Eisenhower, the newly appointed American C&C Europe, takes office in London on the establishment of a European theater of operations for the United States forces. The general is a 51-year-old Texan, clear-thinking, resolute, and tough. At one time, he was General MacArthur's right-hand man. General Eisenhower is in close contact with our Chief of Combined Operations, Lord Louis Mountbatten. The combination is a strong one and bodes well for the Allied cause. 4 American airmen who took part in the Independence Day raid on Holland are decorated at an American bomber station in Britain. Their plane had been so heavily hit by flak that it came down and hit the ground. But they flew on, shot up a gun sight, and made home on one engine. Here's a further pictorial report of the sinking of the U.S. Lexington in the Great Battle of the Coral Sea. A dramatic movie camera record which reveals for the first time the death struggle of the 33,000-ton aircraft carrier. After successfully weathering attack after attack by Jap dive bombers, internal explosions finally spell her doom. With smoke and flames spouting from the carrier, more than 2,000 of her crew abandoned ship. The end of a great ship, yet her loss was avenged 4 times over a few weeks later. Among survivors of the Lexington are the 7 Patton brothers, seen here being greeted by their father, who's on Navy recruiting duty. A great homecoming for the U.S. Navy's most famous family team. Thousands of their townfolk in Portland, Oregon turn out to give a real hometown welcome. They're a family of fighters, the Pattons.
The 27 Japanese bombers which raided Darwin were escorted by 15 fighters. They rained bombs on the north coast Australian town, apparently annoyed at the failure of their attacks by sea. The Battle of the Coral Sea badly upset their plans. Oil storage tanks ablaze presented a difficult task for the firefighters. Every Australian is determined that this further violation of the soil of his homeland shall be repaid time and time again until the Japs scream for mercy, and then they'll get justice. Across the Coral Sea is Port Moresby, key base in New Guinea. Shiploads of war supplies are being unloaded in a hurry, for there is danger of Jap bombers here too. The cargo is safely ashore when duck for shelters, it's the alarm. A big enemy force appears overhead and comes into attack as the defending anti-aircraft guns go into action with all they've got. A rain of bombs falls all round the unloaded ship, but not a single hit. Through hell-like scenes such as this, supplies got through.
Lockheed Hudson touches down at a desert aerodrome, bringing the mysterious Mr. Bullfinch. No disguise, but a fine collection of hats and clothing for the secret visit to the Middle East. General Auchinleck meets the Prime Minister at the start of his electric visit to the Egyptian war zone. Mr. Churchill straightway goes up the line, making personal contact with South African fighting men as a very important part of his busy program. Traveling up to El Alamein, the Prime Minister made a point of chatting with the gun crew. Men of a Royal Artillery regiment doing stout work with a 4.5. Mr. Churchill's visit is a typical Winstonian surprise. The familiar, breezy friendliness goes down well with the boys. Not least of all, the Aussies, one of whom, upon discovering who the sun-helmeted figure was, exclaimed, "Cripes, it's old Winnie." Now the sombrero and the siren suit. With General Smuts in Cairo, Mr. Churchill carries the baby again, the son of Sir Miles Lamson. The great South African General Smuts, General Auchinleck, since succeeded by General Alexander, Generals Wavell and Brooke, Mr. Casey, Admiral Harwood, and Air Chief Marshal Tedder. So we leave the embassy, together with the fervent wish that much good will emerge from the journeyings of our Prime Minister. Across the great divide between the English and French coastlines, where the channel broadens out, Britain struck at the German-occupied port of Dieppe. The eyes of the RAF see it now on the day when combined operations delivered the biggest raid so far carried out on occupied Europe. It was aboard one of our destroyers that we headed out across the channel in company with the men who were about to come to grips with the enemy. In assault landing craft and invasion barges of many kinds, including tank landing craft in operation for the first time, traveled the men who loomed out of the protective smokescreen to batter their way onto the beaches and quays of Dieppe. The Canadians, who formed the major portion of the force, our own special service troops and detachments of fighting French and American Rangers, going into the attack. savage hours, they fought through the hail of German fire. Casualties were piling up on both sides as the Canadians and their brother warriors fought in the 9-hour Battle of Dieppe. Outside the Dieppe Basin, the ALCs crept into the beach under cover of the ship's guns, while high overhead there came the ceaseless drone of warplanes. And the Boston bomber boys sailed in and let fly with many a stick of bombs. The German defenses were being well and truly plastered. After the time scheduled, re-embarkation began, and with their task completed, the landing parties started on their homeward journey. Behind them, much of Dieppe was in flames, a pall of smoke drifting across the scene of stubborn fighting. All the way back, aerial combats were taking place. For hours, the sky was filled with a milling host of fighters, as the biggest air battle ever fought saw planes falling out of the sky like red autumn leaves. A Spitfire circles the spot where a flight sergeant pilot has bailed out and now floats on the supporting air sacs of his Mae West. A frequently repeated incident, but real-life drama with a capital D. Having kicked off his flying boots, the pilot is hauled aboard with the help of many friendly hands and a good stout grab net. In spite of the ordeal, he comes up smiling. That boy deserves your applause. The aftermath of battle always has its casualty lists. At ports along the south coast, Red Cross trains and ambulances were waiting to receive the wounded. Men who had fought so heroically on the beaches, on the cliffs, and in the streets of Dieppe. Back to the green fields of England there came the planes with men of the United Kingdom, of Canada, New Zealand, and our fighting European allies at the controls. These men had written another glorious page in RAF history. American airmen had also valiantly joined in the air battles, which developed on a scale comparable to those fought during the Battle of Britain. When we hit out again, we need no finer soldiers than these. We ask for no better seamen than the sailors who for centuries have ruled the seas. And we seek no nobler airmen. Europe awaits them. Malta's glorious resistance to the enemy is suitably honored in the bomb-battered Palace Square, Valletta, when Lord Gort, VC, Governor and Commander-in-Chief, presents the people of Malta with their George Cross. Sir George Borg, the Chief Justice, receives the decoration for the citizens. He then takes the casket containing the cross and the King's letter which accompanies it to the stand from which the people of Malta may view their cherished honor until such time as it is taken to every village and town in the island. No people on earth have withstood so much as these loyal and stout-hearted Maltese who now read the King's words of admiration. Heavily protected convoys plow through rough seas, bringing American reinforcements for the fighting Marines on Guadalcanal. These official films from the South Pacific War Zone show units of the three services making their surprise attack on the strategic base, which the Japanese have since striven to recover. A fresh Marine force moves in to support the initial successful landing. Here's further evidence of aerial combats taking place in the vicinity. A fighter goes into the sea out of control. The determined Japanese effort to regain Guadalcanal is indicative of the importance they place on the island. If they were to win it back, the threat to Australia would be all the stronger. The struggle is concentrated around the vital aerodrome of Lunga. When the Marines walk in, they find the airfield still burning as a result of heavy bombing. Large quantities of Jap equipment are captured. This is the rosy side of the fight, but the general situation has since deteriorated. Guadalcanal is still a hotly contested base. Flamethrowers are among the variety of weapons left behind. Deeply enraged by their initial reverse, the Japanese are out to stage a comeback. MacArthur's Marines are shouldering a big responsibility. Please to remember the 5th of November, when the 8th Army was making bonfires with the Axis guys in the desert. With a shattering effect, the wonderful news of Rommel's full-scale retreat was let loose to the world. It was then that the first dramatic announcement telling of our victorious advance was broadcast. By direct transmission from Cairo, Godfrey Talbot, the BBC war correspondent in the Middle East, radioed his electrifying dispatch. We reproduce here his historic words.
Out of the desert, out of Cairo, there has come tonight the news for which we have been waiting. The news that all the world that fights for freedom has been wanting to hear. The news that the desert and Cairo has been expecting to be let loose all day. The Axis forces in the desert are in full retreat. There's no shadow of doubt about it. The enemy are on the run, and we are after them. Right on their heels, no half measures. Maybe some of the enemy did get out, but they're with the others in flight before the 8th Army, or dead. It is heartening news indeed tonight. Heartening to the United Nations and to the 8th Army.
The order of the day is wipe out the Axis in Africa. Every communique tells how the German and Italian columns are being relentlessly pursued and destroyed. Day and night, there's no let-up in the hammering. The Montgomery mincing machine is chewing the Afrika Korps to shreds. Outstanding in the battle is the RAF, maintaining a non-stop onslaught on the broken enemy streaming back. The greatest British success of the war overseas has been struck at Rommel, Germany's ablest commander, out-generaled and out-fought. The great toll of enemy prisoners is mounting daily. 9,000 were taken in the first few days, then 4,000 more were quickly added. In their haste to save their own skins, the Germans left 3 divisions of it. And here now are the men whose names ring round the world. General Alexander, our CNC Middle East. General Montgomery, commander of the 8th Army, who has won a glorious victory thanks to the imperishable British soldier. From the great steel city of Stalingrad, ghastly now in its smoking heaps of shell and bomb-battered rubble, has emerged the most stupendous story of human courage and endurance. In this red-hot hell, appalling bombardment has reduced a noble city to wholesale ruin. Thousands have died in the bloodiest siege of history. Day and night, for months on end, the defenders of Stalingrad have fought the most glorious battle in Russian history. On the city's outer perimeter, Red Army men maintain their stubborn resistance. Even though the once model city crumbles under the fire of German siege guns, they never give in. Many times the world expected the fall of Stalingrad, but not so the defenders. They made every foot a death trap for the invaders. To win 2 buildings or 50 yards of roadway, the Germans had to sacrifice hundreds of lives. Street fighting on an unprecedented scale decimated the Nazis, while the Soviet soldiers held on like grim death. Every square became a battleground, every building a fortress. The city of suffering refused to go down. Amid the gutted shells of buildings, in the reeking shambles of its streets, the ghostly remains of a population of 500,000 people eke out a terrible existence. This doesn't look like a city capable of victory, but by the most superb feat of arms, the city of Stalingrad has triumphed. and not only stemmed the tide, but hurled the Nazis back and passed over to the offensive. Nazi hopes of easy conquest are buried in the ruins of unconquerable Stalingrad. We bring you the latest pictures of the Nazis' November nightmare in the Middle East. A pictorial document illustrating the great advance through Egypt into Libya. The unrelenting pressure on the retreating enemy was kept up by land and air. With the Axis defenses completely broken and the Afrika Korps on the run, the big chase began. With no time even to evacuate equipment, dozens of Nazi planes at Foucault Aerodrome were left behind, so rapid was the Eighth Army's advance. German gliders used for transporting troops also hastily abandoned in the headlong flight west. One of the biggest captures was General Ritter von Thoma, commander of the Afrika Korps, who fell into the bag with a lot of other desert wildfowl. On arrival at advance headquarters, he was met by General Sir Bernard Montgomery, a generous victor. Matruh Harbor is now a graveyard of sunken supply ships and battered wharves. A wrecked seaplane fills the foreground. One thing that stands out in this wonderful story of success is the overwhelming numbers of prisoners taken. If our men were too busy to bring them back, thousands trudged back without a guard. They chucked their hats in and walked out of the war. Masses of our heavy tanks were soon speeding out of the town for their next objective. Half a dozen dilapidated men coming forward to surrender as our men march into Tobruk. Booby traps and landmines there are plenty, and it pays to tread warily. Step lightly there, Puss, the roads are dangerous. Once again in Tobruk, there's the question of substituting flags. Across the face of the desert, there moves a swarming mass of men. Without exception, this is the most amazing sight we have set eyes on. Thousands of half-starved Italians streaming in isolated bodies and joining up with a tattered tribe of lost men. We like to end this pictorial trek across Libya with one more tribute to General Montgomery. This is the hour of strong men such as he. Westward, look, the sky is bright.
Britain had grown used to the hardships of war. The Blitz continued, but soon other towns started to feel the might of the Luftwaffe. The RAF had started to bomb cities in the Baltic states. This so infuriated Hitler that he decided to retaliate. He did so by launching his so-called Baedeker raids. He ordered that every town mentioned in the Baedeker Guides to Britain should be obliterated. Exeter, Bath, York and Norwich were hit. Later in the year, Canterbury also suffered from a German version of saturation bombing. Britain also had troubles within the empire. In India, Gandhi had continued his campaign of civil disobedience. Sir Stafford Cripps traveled to India to calm the situation, and the country was promised dominion status. The thoughts of politicians and academics were not monopolized by the war. The famous Beveridge Report came out in 1942. This is a landmark in the social history of Britain. In the report, Sir William Beveridge, a leading liberal, outlined proposals for the setting up of a welfare state. The social and health services Britain enjoyed after the war were a direct result of that report.
Princess Elizabeth celebrates her 16th birthday by inspecting, as their new colonel, the Grenadier Guards at a special parade at Windsor Castle. The occasion also marks her entry into the official life of the nation. Her Royal Highness the Colonel walks to the long ranks of guardsmen, followed by the King and Queen and Princess Margaret. Wearing the gold grenade badge of the Grenadiers in her hat, Princess Elizabeth makes her first military inspection. The first part of the parade over, Her Royal Highness goes to the dais where, with the King at her side, she takes the salute as the regiment marches past. This colourful ceremony in the castle quadrangle is one of the first functions to be held on the busy day when the princess celebrates her coming out. And the final pose picture taken at the end of the review may be regarded as a record of the first official occasion in the life of England's future queen. Their Excellencies the Viceroy and Marchioness of Linlithgow greet Sir Stafford Cripps on his arrival at New Delhi for consultations with leaders of Indian political parties. First to confer with him is Maulana Abul Azad, the President of the Congress. Mr. Jinnah, leader of the Muslim League, arrived in smiling mood. Sir Stafford's task has been described as the most delicate mission in the history of the British Commonwealth. Representatives of the princes are the Chancellor and Vice-Chancellor of the Chamber of Princes. In white is the Chancellor, His Highness the Maharaja of Naonuga, and with him is the warrior ruler, His Highness the Maharaja of Bikaner. Another caller is Sir Henry Gidney, leader of the Anglo-Indians and domiciled Europeans. The Sikhs send delegates to represent their important community. Pandit Nehru, one of the most important political figures in India, has one of several meetings with Sir Stafford while in company with Maulana Abul Azad. The Mahatma Gandhi, clad in his loincloth and shawl, entered largely into the discussions which, although destined to reach a deadlock, will at least provide a basis for future negotiation. The King and Queen have come to see how Bath now takes its place in Hitler's plan of war. Once again, the distorted German mind conjures up hopes of breaking British morale. But the same indomitable spirit that prevailed during the days of the Battle of Britain is seen in our bombed cities today. From Buckingham Palace, mobile canteens were sent by their majesties to bring help and comfort to the homeless and civil defense workers. Destruction and death are no new things to us, but where once we suffered them and looked to the time when we would give back as much as we took, today the hour of retribution is with us. Night after night, day after day, we're making the Nazis squirm with our colossal air attacks. Where once we sent tens of planes, now it's hundreds. And to revenge the huge losses to their war machine which we cause, the Germans turn the pages of a traveler's reference book and pick out our beauty spots and historic landmarks for destruction. Bath is famous for both, but her fame today is to be found in such people as her special constables who suffered severely, in her firefighters and wardens, her rescue parties and nurses. The people of Bath are famous, and their majesties recognize this by going among them with words of sympathy and praise. No threat of historical reprisals will cause diversion from our policy of heavy and still heavier bombing of Germany. While they may concentrate their bombers on targets suggested by Mr. Baedeker, the RAF will continue to open up the second front in the skies over Germany. Wearing his Air Force uniform of Air Commodore of the RAF, Mr. Churchill makes an inspection at a bomber station during his round of visits in the northeast. Among other places, where the Prime Minister makes his inspection while seated on the gun turret of a Covenanter. An inspiring sight comes with a massed formation of tanks and planes driving and flying past to the saluting base. The Prime Minister's party, which included Dr. Evatt, the Australian Minister of External Affairs, later made a tour of a munitions factory, where Mr. Churchill tries his hand at one of the machines. The operator is able to show him how she makes things hum at her section of the production line. In the distance, you'll see Mr. Churchill exchanging a kiss for a cigar given to him by one of the women factory workers. From here, we traveled to where 25,000 people had gathered outside Leeds Town Hall to hear words of encouragement on the work Britishers are doing in the war effort. The Prime Minister laid emphasis on our arrangements for meeting the enemy, thanks to the assistance of hundreds of thousands of active and willing hands. To the accompaniment of a lot of hearty cheering, a river steamer brings the King and Queen, during their comprehensive tour of Scotland, to one of the many industrial centres north of the border. Men of the Royal Navy, Merchant Service, and the shipyard workers are among those to be specially honoured. At Paisley, Her Majesty is greatly interested in what is being done at a day nursery for the children of war workers. Edinburgh and Glasgow give their Majesties a great reception. And in the latter city, firemen and women at the National Fire Service Training Centre demonstrate their skill in the use of all types of appliances. Now to Blantyre, Lanarkshire, where at the Miners' Welfare Centre, the Queen is invited to test her aim on the bowling green. Her Majesty sends down a wood that would please many a professional. These scenes and many others like them illustrate the warm welcome which Scotland extends to the royal visitors. It is vital that all transport is left free for the war effort, so we really must spend our holidays at home. After all, the same sun shines on your garden or local swimming pool as on the beach at Tiddlypush-on-Sea. There's an old saying that a change is as good as a rest. But it's just as true to say, a rest is as good as a change. You needn't go far for most of the holiday pastimes you've enjoyed in the past. Surely there's a river or lake fairly near at home. Tennis courts are everywhere. Dancing on the lawn is being arranged by many local authorities, while bands will play in most of the parks. It's a good opportunity to catch up on the films you missed, while Rod and Line can bring big surprises. How much nicer your garden or allotment will be after you and the family have spent extra time on it. And how much nicer that little drop of ginger pop will taste. If you like an energetic holiday, how about a spot of cycling or hiking in pleasant company? What a chance to improve your golf handicap on the nearest course. Or spend a lazy day watching cricket with an alfresco tea to follow. These few suggestions will surely show that you can spend a happy holiday at home instead of impeding the war effort by using transport needed for serious purposes. Yes, they're all a-blowing and a-blowing in the balmy breezes of a north country town. Mums and dads and grandpas. The mobile laundry has arrived, and instead of women having to go down to the river as they did of old, they can bring the smalls and things to the travelling laundry. Bundles of mischief and bundles of washing at the same time. So into the boilers go the knickknacks, the whatsis and the thingamybobs, while into the pictures, if they like, go the housewives who, but for the mobile laundry, would either have to do the washing at home or take it to a distant washery. The touring wash house caters for every branch of the laundering art, but it can't get away from the Iron Age. The King, who recently became Colonel-in-Chief of the Home Guard, pays a visit to units training and exercising in the Southeastern Command. One of the many Home Guardsmen with whom the King talks is Lance Corporal Roby, son of the comedian. When asked if he was following in his father's footsteps, he replied that he is on the staff of the Director of Public Prosecutions. The King is shown a new submachine gun, the Sten, an automatic weapon now being issued to the Home Guard. Before leaving, the King made a point of saying how much he had been impressed by all he had seen. Sid Walker goes out after old gramophone records in the nationwide British Legion salvage campaign.
Hello, Sid.
Hello, Nellie.
Still shoving the old barrel?
Yes,
Well, I got a record for you. My wedding day.
I mean, that's a few years back.
Yes, but you know, it's never too late. Might happen again.
Sid, yes? Pick up these records. They're worn out and just fit for scrap.
Lummy, ain't you like Stanley Holloway?
Well, I am standing all the way.
Oh, perhaps that accounts for it.
On to the old barrow they go, while Lupino Lane goes hunting from house to house down Lambeth Way.
What are you doing with it? Wearing it out. Can I have it? Yes. Thanks.
And here's what he wants it for. To add to the millions of worn and unwanted gramophone records which are needed for the recovery of shellac, an essential commodity in the manufacture of records. The broken pieces are pulverized and the dust fed onto heated rollers which produce the plastic base for new discs. After passing through a variety of processes, the sheets of basic material ultimately emerge as new records under the giant presses which turn out the finished article. These are destined to play an important part in war. Factories, hospitals, and our men in enemy prison camps will profit by the response to this appeal.
Stars of the screen are called in to twinkle for charity in a great Washington roundup. At this mass get-together, plans are made for the picture celebrities to go places and collect. And if you want an autograph, it's all yours for the paying. Secretary Morgenthau welcomes the visitors. When Hollywood comes to Washington, it is indeed a moving picture. And what better missioners for charity than the stars of the silver screen? If you want to see them in person, the accent's on the purse. Greer Garson, otherwise Mrs. Miniver, goes to work. The smallest contributions are thankfully received, and if you want a written acknowledgement, well, the signature might be worth a lot. You can sell it and hand over the proceeds. Hedy Lamarr takes a hand, and her fountain pen is kept very busy. Charm for charity is a good choice, and it's in a good cause.
The whole of Britain rejoices as out of the royal coach steps America's First Lady to be greeted by her host and hostess, the King and Queen. A great moment, and one which lost all formality in the warmness of its friendly atmosphere. Representing the U.S. Armed Forces are General Eisenhower and Admiral Stark. The modest and endearing personality of Mrs. Roosevelt makes itself felt from the outset. She has set herself a full and comprehensive program. One of her early visits is to St. Paul's Cathedral at the start of her tour of the city and the East End, with its many evidences of the Blitzkrieg days. During her drives in company with the King and Queen, Mrs. Roosevelt repeatedly refers to the spirit of Mr. and Mrs. Everyman, which still shines through the scarred face of London. And then our friendly visitor comes to Stepney, still pursuing her sympathetic inquiries and at all times avidly absorbing all she sees. A self-styled learner of British methods in many things, wherever she goes, she is storing up a wealth of information to pass on to the President. Women in uniform particularly interest her. But just for the moment, it is John Citizen of the East End who claims her admiration. Here's another human story. Yes, he's beginning to believe he is wonderful. She told him so.
As during the First World War, women took over many jobs thought to be suitable only for men. In 1941, a big drive had been made to get women into armaments factories and into jobs left vacant by men sent to the war. Single women had been called up to serve on anti-aircraft teams, and the newsreels took their contribution to the war effort seriously. The change in attitudes to women was remarkable, and although they returned to their traditional roles after the war, things would never be the same again.
The Vingle hairstyle, the shortcut for victory. If your war job is where the wheels are turning, it's only common sense to play for safety and keep your hair short. Believe you me, a hair on the head's worth two in the machinery. While you're having it cut, why not have it made attractive also? A mob cap isn't enough. Hair can still escape and cause untold trouble. The partings form 4 V's, hence V-Ingle, Vingle. You should bear in mind some of the other troubles due to long hair at war work. Dust, grit and powder may get into the hair, causing most distressing skin complaints. And though you may be giving your services to the war effort, there's no reason why you should give your complexion too. Looks well, doesn't it? And now I hope you'll forgive me for breaking into rhyme. If you'd avoid a bad scalp tingle, take care of your hair. The answer's Vingle. Bad verse, but good advice. More women are coming into industry every day, and much more varied are their jobs. Indeed, today, women are tackling jobs that were thought impossible a few years ago. Women crane drivers are a new departure, and they've justified themselves at similar tasks that need great care and judgment. Women are taking to shipbuilding, like the ships they helped to build take to water. And you can see they've got push. Girl riveters are fast becoming as skillful as the men. Maybe it's because riveting must be done in the heat of the moment. Is it the ship in courtship that attracts them? No, it's the tea in afternoon. It might be said, of course, that women are more used to painting, but not this sort of painting. They're renovating a railway bridge so that the crossing will be clean and bright, not to say gay. They told our cameraman, very wittily, that that was their express purpose. As you can see, they've risen to great heights already, brush in hand and pot in reserve. And if they feel like a smoke, they're giving that old bridge a new coat so that they can buy themselves a new one. Now we know why the tide rises and falls. When these cuties hit the drink, even in New York's swimming pool, it must affect the sea level for miles around. The launching of the SS Fatso. Her tonnage is a wartime secret, of course, but she's so buoyant she bounces right out again. And this cruiserweight has a displacement that all but empties the bathing pool. So long, Slim, we'll be seeing you, I hope. Yes, the camera can do what a crane can't. One side, please. Here comes Blossom. Here now is a triple threat. 3 depth charges on a submarine hunt. Look out below. There they blow. Streamlined bathing beauties that are super buxom and bountiful. They're a sensation. Every time they bounce, the place rocks. The other day, we visited a West of England aerodrome where we saw a squad of WAF flight mechanics in business-like dungarees working on the engines of Avro, Anson and Oxford aircraft. Smart young girls with a flair for engineering. Look at this lovely bit of work. She's a peach. Air-cooled with 350 horsepower in her cylinders. Out on the tarmac, we saw one of the test pilots giving a few words of advice. But not all their work is on the ground. With parachute packs in the right place, they set off for a flight to study engine performance. Whoops, WAF. Listening to the engine's heartbeats, watching the rev counter as the advanced trainer planes take off. At 1,000 feet, the girls have their eyes glued to the instrument panel and noting down the readings on their charts. Technical training spread over many months has turned these girls into first-class mechanics. Nice work, and girls can get it.
For 3 years, we have been waging a defensive war. Now, we are going over to the offensive on land, on the sea, and in the air. Every man who can fight is needed for fighting. And it is up to the women of Britain to take over the non-combatant duties. All 3 of the women's services are now open to volunteers. Whether you are married or single, if you are between the ages of 17.5 and 45, there is a job waiting for you, a job that must be filled. Whatever job you are doing now, if it is not of the most vital necessity, you can be released. You are needed in the ATS, in the RENS, in the WAF. You are vital to the offensive.
(1942) saw the war widen on all fronts. In the Pacific, Japan made headway, but the United States, using its military might, slowed Japanese progress. 1942, a year to remember.
Parkfield acquired the British Pathé Library in October 1989 and are proud to present their first compilation, A Year to Remember, 1930 to 1969. A year-by-year visual feast of some of the best newsreel footage ever on 40 videos. The Depression, the abdication, the war, the coronation. Or are there other events that had a special meaning for you? Like a cue from a favorite song, bringing to life forgotten feelings and thoughts. The Pathé newsreels were always something special, between the B feature and the trailers for next week's cinema presentation. More than just the news, they now reflect a time capsule perspective of everything from the greatest triumphs to the more trivial aspects of daily life. Pathé had its finger on the pulse of society. It created what is surely one of the most prolific year-by-year film documents in the world, born from a period of unparalleled events and change. See if you don't remember a few forgotten moments on this brief run through the decades. 1930 to 1939.
General Goering, the Premier of Prussia, drives with his bride, the famous opera singer, to the cathedral, followed by Germany's best man, Hitler.
Terry wins 6-3, 6-love, 7-5.
Sir Malcolm hopes to be the first man to achieve a speed of 300 miles per hour.
And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
1940 to 1949.
The latest news is that there won't be enough nylons for everyone until June 1947.
It will not be by German hands that the structure of Europe will be rebuilt.
With a shattering effect, the wonderful news of Rommel's full-scale retreat was let loose to the world. The Montgomery mincing machine is chewing the Africa Corps to shreds. Allied landing craft beaching on the Normandy shore. Monty goes ashore to set up his headquarters. The closing chapter of the war in Europe. All hostility by German forces to cease by 0800 hours.
1950 to 1959.
This is London. It was announced from Sandringham that the King passed peacefully away in his sleep.
This was the place chosen to explode Britain's first atomic weapon. And Bannister has done it. The mile in 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds.
Elizabeth is Queen.
The London-Birmingham motorway begins a new era in British travel by road.
Any sort of invasion happens against Egypt, canal will vanish to be a canal.
1960 to 1969.
That smiling face with which the whole world was familiar, death has blotted out. The Beatles are the top pop music phenomenon. And goal it was! The first British car ever to have passed the incredible production figure.
On July 20th, 1969, man went to the moon.
The triumphs, tragedies and trivia of 40 momentous years. The Parkfield Pathé collection, A Year to Remember.
Ooh, lovely grub.